You are listening to the Choose Your Struggle podcast, a member of the Shameless Podcast Network. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that it's not the only thing I do. Choose Your Struggle is an entire brand. I speak, I coach and consult. I have rock bottom storytellers. There's a lot going on. And sometimes I get to a project and I go, man, I can't do all of this myself. So I turn to Fiverr. It's so easy to find incredible professionals who can help me out. I've hired people to help with marketing, help with SEO, help with my website. So much great stuff all on Fiverr. I even found Kid Mental, who did the incredible theme song on Fiverr. So if you have a project that you need some help on, go check out Fiverr. Use the link in the show notes or my podcast website, and you'll help the podcast in the process. Check them out today.
Choose your struggle. Choose your struggle. Choose your struggle. Choose your struggle.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. It's a special episode, the first of the season. This is a chat with John Loxley, who's the host of the Life in Recovery podcast. John and I connected, had a wonderful conversation, and originally the thought was we'd do an episode swap. It's already out on his podcast, but after listening to it, I said, it doesn't really fit my podcast in a traditional form. I'm going to put it out as a special episode. John and I come from a very different background in our recovery, and we talk about some of these different ideas. And then we also talk about all the ways we overlap. It's a really good conversation. Now, a couple of points, because it's not a traditional podcast layout, there are a couple of the questions that you know and love, but there's no good egg or anything like that in this episode. And it's not your traditional me interviewing him. It very much is a conversation. Also, I realized about 3/4 of the way through that I never switched my microphone over from the computer mic to this external one. Now, normally I record in Zencastr. Zencastr wasn't working for John for some reason, hence our recording on Zoom. But because of that and my idiocy forgetting to switch my microphone, I sound like garbage for the first 3/4 of the interview. I apologize. The conversation is worth it, I promise. Last point, this Wednesday, January 27th, 8:30 Eastern Time on Facebook and on YouTube, Rock Bottom Storytellers. Make sure you've liked the Facebook page, subscribe to YouTube so you don't miss it. Log in then, catch Rock Bottom. All right, enjoy this special episode.
I don't normally do any welcomes or intros for my podcast. I just get straight into it. So I'll like record my own intro and then lead into that. If
I do the same thing. You've told me already, but I forget that the different etymology of your names. Who am I referencing in this episode?
Yeah, I'm John Loxley. I'm not. I was using the name Ren Coy as a pseudonym for my books for writing my books for a few years, and then when I started the podcast, I just continued using that name. But it all became quite confusing, and I wanted to just do everything under my true name, John. So yeah, John Loxley. Been in recovery for just over 10 years, since 2010, and been recording the podcast since 2018. So just over a couple of years.
That's funny. I appreciate you doing that intro. I'll cut this part out. Usually I have a very set way of doing it, but I was asking because of my own confusion and because honestly, your name is it's like something out of Robin Hood, right? John Loxley is it sounds like you should be writing with Robin Hood is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, it is Loxley is the surname of Robin Hood. So I've always been proud of the surname. I changed it for anonymity purposes because as you know, in the kind of world of recovery, especially the 12-step world, it's suggested that we remain anonymous at the level of press, radio and films. And that was something that I've observed until fairly recently. And the only reason that I've made the decision to not observe that anymore is because it was kind of sold to me by a few people that they thought I could be of more help to people if I just kind of be true to me. So yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I love that. So I guess we're just diving right in here, which is great. I love to say on my show, and I've said this with a couple. This is not me originally, but there are two dates for people in recovery. There's the date that you enter recovery and the date that you started talking about it. And I think that is something that we're seeing a lot more of from our generation, and people who are, as the cultural shift goes away from AA only into AA is one of many ways into recovery, you're seeing less of that anonymity piece and more people doing what you and I do, which is just being open about it like you would about a lot of things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, when you look back to the 1940s and you consider that the reason why those early recovering alcoholics wanted to maintain their anonymity was because, if their employers would have found out that they were drunks and that they got sober, they potentially might have got sacked from their employment, or also, as recovery progressed over the, into this kind of 60s and 70s, it then became a case of, well, if somebody famous like Anthony Hopkins is a perfect example. Apparently, he went on the radio in the 1980s, I believe, and he kind of announced on the radio that he was in AA. And apparently, when he went back to his home group that weekend, he got an ear bashing from his fellows and from his sponsor, and they said, you can't. You can't divulge your anonymity, because if you were to relapse, then that would send the wrong message out to people. People would think that AA doesn't work. And actually now I think we've come to a place, in 2021 where, if Russell Brand, for example, was to relapse tomorrow, I don't think the rest of the world would think that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. And I don't think the rest of the world would think that recovery is not for them as a result of him relapsing. God forbid that he ever did, but he's the perfect example of somebody who's obviously massively in the public eye and very open about his recovery. So from our perspective, like the layperson like you and I, who's got like kind of a small reach, but a reach nonetheless, it feels a little bit like a duty now to just be open and transparent, and I suppose share a message of hope. And interestingly, I wanted to just say something actually, which there was I posted something on Facebook a couple of days ago, and it was, I was kind of joking, but I was being a bit derogatory towards a group of people, and it turned into this humongous kind of like disagreement basically with a certain faction of people that were supporting my view and a certain faction of people that were really upset by my view. And a few people kind of pointed out to me that, that I do have a responsibility, because I've got a certain amount of followers I've got 2 Facebook pages, and because I've got a certain amount of followers on those pages, I do have a certain responsibility to live by example, lead by example. And that is true as far as I see my life today. I try to live as kind of good in inverted commas life as I possibly can, and lead by example. And if I'm not doing that, then it sends the wrong message. So, that's kind of where I stand on my, on being out there and spreading a message of hope, I suppose.
First off, thank you for telling that story. Second, I think it's really important to say that a piece of that is living honestly, living truthfully, and showing, the warts and all. And so, I think of something very similar, but to a much less degree, because it didn't create a bunch of furor, happened on the first episode of this season with a young woman named Rebecca Lieb, and I were talking about conspiracy theories. And someone wrote in and said, it sounded like you were being too much of an apologist for people who believe in really dangerous conspiracy theories like we see over here in the States right now with QAnon and stuff like that. And I addressed that on a later episode of this podcast, actually dropped yesterday as we're recording this, saying exactly how I feel. And you can agree with me, you can disagree with me, but I never want my listeners to wonder how I feel about something. I want it to be out there. I want to be honest with them. And if that means you don't want to listen to the show anymore, that's cool. That is your prerogative. And as I think a lot of us in the mental health space are starting to learn,
chasing the people who are not a good fit, whatever business you're in, isn't ever going to be a successful plan for someone, and finding your niche is much more important.
Yeah, that is absolutely bang on, Jay. Couldn't agree more with that. I mean, you can't please everybody, and you've got to stay true to your opinions, with the caveat that my opinions are always open to change. Like, we could have a conversation right now and you could convince me of something. Well, exactly like I said before about the anonymity piece, I was convinced for 2 years that it wasn't the right thing to do, was to be open and honest about, the fact that John Loxley's in recovery, and I felt like I should maintain a level of anonymity. And now I've had my opinion changed by people that I trust, and I thank them for their opinions, and and it changed my mind. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm interested now. You've just piqued my interest about conspiracy theories. so where do you stand on the old conspiracies?
So I think what's really interesting, and this is what Rebecca and I talked about, is that there are certain things that whether we see them as a conspiracy and they're actually true from the beginning, or they become true over time, there is truth in them, and the example that we both use, because it's really famous over here, is something called MK Ultra. If you're not familiar with this, or listeners, if you're not familiar, there was a conspiracy theory in the States for a long time that our government was trying to brainwash people. And then it came out that it was true, that there were experiments by our government to try using LSD and other psychedelics to literally brainwash people. And so that was one where the conspiracy predated this truth. But then it seems like the government kind of went, well, if they think we're already doing it, we might as well try doing this, right? So that piece is what we were talking about, because her show is called Ghost Town, and it's all about paranormal and true crime and stuff like that. And as someone who currently, I believe in extraterrestrial, I think paranormal, I have no reason not to believe in. I've had experiences that I can't explain. Now, what am I ever going to definitively say that's a ghost or something? No. I mean, who knows? That's the point, is that it's okay to question. But that there's a long leap there from that sort of thing to QAnon, which, again, for the listeners, is this belief that President Trump is fighting a deep state of people made up of, depending on your beliefs, anywhere from child rapists all the way up to lizard people. This is just, there's literally nothing that shows that this is true ever. And the fact that there is a not insignificant amount of people in this country who believe it, so much so that people have fought and died and killed others in the name of this, is incredibly scary. And so I think that the label conspiracy theory is almost too big, that, why is believing in some of these things, but there is proof on, but it's not sort of accepted, the same thing as being lumped in with that, where it's so dangerous and so scary.
I think the two things tie in with what we're kind of primarily talking about as well, which is addiction. Because if you look at what constitutes addiction, addiction is the underlying mental health conditions that people attempt to medicate with, right, with behaviors and substances, right? And that those mental health issues are on a gradient, as simple as, and in the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous, it refers to it as the spiritual malady. And when you kind of break down what the spiritual malady is, it is essentially emotional and mental health issues that are caused by a great number of factors, primarily environmental factors, also genetics, etc. And so when you're looking at the conspiracies, the way I see it is that's on a gradient as well. The extreme end of the conspiracy theories, like your QAnon, is pretty much, seems to me, objectively like mental health issues, whereas potentially believing in ghosts and extraterrestrials, well, there's a lot of evidence out there, and especially when you've had your own personal experiences of these things, that you can objectively say, well, yeah, I can, I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure that there's something going on there. And I'm the same as you, mate. I when it comes to the paranormal, I've had numerous experiences throughout my life, and close friends of mine have had numerous experiences, and I believe that they believe what they have seen and heard and stuff. And extraterrestrials, I've had 2 experiences of seeing UFOs in my life. And again, I've done a lot of research into it. I've listened to the Rogan podcasts on it, and for me, there is enough information out there to suggest that to think that we're the only life in the universe is just completely ridiculous. Anyway, as far as I can
it's
see
selfish. It's selfish to think that we are somehow special in this vast universe. And I just, again, back to this conversation I had with Rebecca, we pointed out how, again, and this is only in the States, so I can't comment on across the pond, as you say, but they did a survey, and 60% of people believe in life in the universe, 50% believe it's intelligent. So what that says to you is that 40% do not believe that there's life on anywhere other than Earth, which has already been proven to be true, just not in the way that they conceptualize life, right? I mean, these are microorganisms that NASA and other places have found, but those 40% of people in this country who were surveyed for this do not say that that is life. And again, to us, that was just an inability to think outside of this box that we have put ourselves in of what life is. And again, it's selfish. That's it, but I love your point about that on the extreme end, it is a sort of a mental health issue. I mean, if you took some of those beliefs, right, that Donald Trump was fighting a war against lizard people, and you just took that out of the QAnon movement, and you took that into a therapist's office, they would say that's a delusion. That is a flat out delusion. And yet there are thousands, if not millions, of people who believe that delusion. And that's scary. But it also needs to be treated as a mental health thing. We should be tackling it the same way.
Unless the lizard people are aliens, and then it's okay.
That's right. That's right. You said something else that was really important, and I going back to actually a quote by your countryman Johann Hari, who said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. Which I think is so important, and it goes exactly to what you were just saying. That's what a lot of these people are searching for in this movement. It's this feeling of shared connection of, as I said on an earlier episode of this podcast, if you have a lot of people telling them that this sort of control that the white man has held in the country and this world for a long time is slipping away, but it's not slipping, it's being stolen from you. And you have a lot of people who believe this and think that they can have a say in that, and there are others that think that way too. It's really easy to understand how quickly that becomes a slippery slope into let's all get together and do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to be part of a tribe, don't they? And, when you, it'll be interesting to kind of get into your recovery, but like my recovery was kind of the general story that you hear where somebody hits rock bottom, they go to a 12-step meeting, it changes their life, they get a sponsor, they work the steps, they have a spiritual awakening, and everything changes, and slowly but surely over this 10-year period, everything in my life has changed. I've gone from being a very, very selfish dependent alcoholic who used drugs regularly to somebody who doesn't do any of those things apart from psychedelics every now and then, and who tries his best to go against those kind of instinctual, selfish drives and try to be of service to people and to help people as much as I can. And that doesn't mean to say that I'm any kind of saint, because I'm certainly not, and I'm certainly still driven by material wants and desires. But I have a goal, and the goal is to become progressively less selfish, basically. So, to living life in that kind of way, it means that I question everything. Like I question everything that's going on around me, and I also have to consider that that I need other people. Like I need other people around me to helped me question my own thinking. And when I joined 12-step fellowships, it felt like I'd kind of come home. It felt like I was around people that understood me. So I completely get why everybody out there is looking for that feeling, because they feel isolated, especially now. I mean, Jesus Christ, like this COVID-19 pandemic has got to go down in history as the great leveler of society, hasn't it? Because what I'm observing, and again, I might be in my own echo chamber here, I don't know, but what I'm hearing from the people around me is those that have kind of got some sort of a program or a spiritual basis for a life, not even necessarily a spiritual basis, but they've got like routine, structure, they're kind of they've got morals and values, and they're kind of like not always thinking about themselves. They seem to be doing okay, whereas the people who have just carried on as they were, they seem to be struggling. And I think that's where the mental health issues are exacerbated, and these kind of conspiracy theories are exacerbated even more, because they just want something to grab hold of. Life's shit, basically. So therefore, let's grab hold of this crazy conspiracy theory and run with it and go out and shoot a few people.
It is definitely our sort of the great leveler. I love that word. And what I think is it's really doing is, for those who people are grabbing onto whatever they can, and for some people those are really healthy things, routine, yes, groups that can be of support, partnerships. I was talking to someone not long ago who is a relationship therapist, and they were saying that what they've seen is that no relationship is just doing fine. There are relationships that are flourishing because that's all they've got right now is their partner. And there are relationships that are absolutely crumbling because people are really struggling to go, oh my God, like this is my only like person right now. Is this what I want? And there's a lot of sort of spiraling, I think is the word that they were using, of people really going down in a bad path. Leveling is a great word for it, because you're finding we're finding in our lives the things that actually matter to us. What is coming up when all of this dust settles, it's kind of what remains for us. And for me, I work with a lot of people who have reached out to say, I've been treading water for a year now. I honestly don't know what to do. A lot of speakers, that was my job before this pandemic. That's really what I was focused on, who have really floundered because they don't know what to do now that the speaking industry is just gone. And I'm really lucky. I started this podcast right before the COVID really hit, because I saw the writing on the wall and was like, I'm going to have something to do. But I also feel for those people if they've been doing this for 20 years and all of a sudden everything they've known is just gone. And you're right, that's where, when they're searching for something, the first thing that looks like a life vest that comes along, they're going to grab to and hold on tight. And that can be a really dangerous thing.
Yeah, I think when you've hit rock bottom once in your life, you can kind of cope, like you realize that, this situation that I'm in is nothing like how I felt at the end of my drinking. Like I actually did want to kill myself, and the only options were suicide or do something about it, and I did something about it, and thank God I did, because I can completely relate to people who are now in a situation where they're at rock bottom because they don't have the necessary tools and some sort of a program in place in order to get through this stuff. It's really hard. I'm not saying I find life super easy, because I don't. I have ups and downs myself. Some days I have, like I said to my friend yesterday, I said I probably have one day per month where I feel just shit for absolutely no reason, and then I might have 2 or 3 days in that month where I just feel a little bit but generally I'm like, peace of mind, feeling good. I can crack on with my work and do exercise. And the main thing for me over this pandemic, the one area that I'm looking to now focus on is my eating, because I've been eating terribly. Well, I say terribly. I've just got a chocolate addiction. Other than that, I eat quite well actually. But I just, the chocolate has been my go-to for boredom, really. Like any time and you said about, finding the things that are meaningful to you. I mean, over this past year, I used to DJ for years, and like I had to leave the DJing and the music behind because it was too entwined with that lifestyle of drugs and drinking and partying and stuff, and I just couldn't really do it anymore. But over the last 5 years, I've not done any music at all, like none whatsoever, and I've just got back into it. I've started listening to loads of my old music, and I've really kind of like reignited the love for it again. And I've started producing some music with a friend of mine who's in recovery, and I'm really enjoying it. And it's something that I've recognised as an integral part of my life that I need. I need the certain things I need in my life. Like the podcast is one of them. I stopped doing the podcast for a while and realised that I really missed that. So there's the podcast, there's the music. Those are my hobbies, and then the most important things to me are my family, my kids and my partner, and spending time with them, and walking the dog, and and doing my meetings and all that good stuff that keeps me sober. So I have my priorities, and my ducks are in a row. Let's just put it that way. And as a result of that, I have a good. My mental health's very, very strong at the moment. So yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you, I suppose a perfect segue into that is, how's your mental health currently, and what kind of led you into recovery?
Well, currently it's been all right. I use an app to track my mental health every day, 1 to 5. And this is something that I recommend to all of the clients that I work with on a coaching basis, because people like me struggle with depression. You get into those ruts, and next thing you know, that little voice in your head is telling you this is how life always is. You feel terrible all the time. And it's easy to buy into that. And now I have the literal data to show, no, that's not true. Most of the time I'm between a 3 and a 4, which is things are fine to things are pretty good. Occasionally I'm down to a 2, occasionally up to a 5. I know when I'm down at a 1, okay, got to call my therapist, got to, do the little things, because this is that rut. So it's definitely a helpful thing to have. Is that app. And also I have mindfulness practices that I do every day that really help me stay between a 3 and a 4. Now, obviously you have a bad day. The perfect example is working on this podcast, as when sound quality stuff comes in, your microphone's not working, man, that is a recipe for a shit day. Because messing around with technology when you're like, I have to get this podcast out, why is this not working, all of a sudden is just the worst. But aside from things like that, it's been pretty good. And I really appreciate your point sort of about taking pleasure in the little things in life, spending time with your kids, with your partner, taking the dog for a walk. As we're recording this, my wife is on a staycation. She took a couple of days to go to a beachside hotel where she's doing nothing other than walking on the beach and doing work, but in a hotel room. And it's just me and the dog, and we've had a very nice time, just the two of us. And those little moments are fun, because it's like, it's a little different. It's outside of the routine. And the dog is also very attached to my wife, and so it's sort of been a recalibration of, I have to rely on you now. Oh man, which has been good, I think, for both of us. So that's been wonderful. That has nothing to do with my story into recovery. Mine is almost the opposite of yours. It is, my issue was never alcohol, and as you and I talked about when we first were chatting, I still have a drink. I can drink safely. And my issue was always prescription pills. And so after years of struggling with that, and hitting what for a lot of people would have been rock bottom, when I attempted suicide twice in 2 days and overdosed, I kept going. It kept going down. I ended up in a lockdown facility for 3 weeks, in a long-term care facility, what we would have called a mental institution years ago, for 3 months. And there was where a lot of these things sort of slowly exposed themselves, that I'd been given a label for my mental health that didn't fit, and was being treated for this thing that I didn't have, and decided to get off all the medication, and finally hit my personal rock bottom on my way out of this facility. But it really helped me understand that this path is very different for everybody. And I did try twice to go to two AA groups, one AA, one NA, and it didn't really work for me. And so that is where my struggles against, my way is the only way, quote unquote, comes from, because what you're telling me is, well, what about me? You know what I mean? Like, I am living proof that that's not true. And so I love, I work with I'm in groups and communities with people who are the full spectrum of the recovery community, right? AA is the only way, all the way to harm reduction. AA is trash and all that. And I fall solidly in the middle, because I honestly think whatever works for you is the right thing. And the only thing that I struggle with is that word only. If you're preaching only, then you're not doing this for the right reasons. You're doing this for your personal brand, whatever the case is. If you're actually trying to get people to be better, to not lose so many people every year, you're going to be open to trying whatever's going to work for that person. And we're seeing a lot more of that. I think by the time, I don't know if it's this decade, but maybe next, we'll get to a point where this idea of camps in this community is a past idea. And we're going to be at a point where people are going to have options and say, okay, that didn't work, let me try this. Okay, that didn't work, let me try this other thing.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that what you've just shared. I love the fact that you can have a drink. I mean, that's awesome. That is awesome. I mean, it for me, it totally, everything that you've just said there perfectly marries up with the point I made earlier about this spiritual malady, this underlying emotional issues, because you're somewhere on that gradient, and you might not be the extreme end. Like, the extreme end is the person who might need to be completely abstinent from all substances, who might have ended up I don't know, like living homeless for the last 30 years, and there's absolutely no way on this earth that person can put any mind or mood altering substances in their body, because it will lead them to relapse. And if you're one of those people, absolutely fantastic, there's a pathway for you. If you're a person like yourself who's in the middle, and I love the words that you used, whatever works. I've used that exact phrase countless times on my podcast, and it's just so true. I mean, I was of the what do you call? I was a fundamentalist AA, I suppose, in the early days, and I would have said to anybody that I came across, no, total abstinence, and this is the only thing that works. There's nothing else that works. And then I started working in a prison as a drug and alcohol counsellor, and I came across so many different types of people, and it just became very, very apparent that there isn't a one size fits all. You've got to find what works for your personality and what works for your physiology. And for me personally, I just found my tribe when I went to 12-step fellowships. And the irony of that, though, is that I've been to other 12-step fellowships. So I'm in one, and I've been to many other different ones, and I didn't like them. I didn't relate to the people in the rooms. I didn't feel like they that they were my kind of people, in inverted commas, and that's all my own stuff anyway. But the fact of the matter was that there was one that worked for me, and I kept going to that one, and I keep going to that one. And I'm still open-minded about other types of groups. I mean, I've had loads of therapy. I've had counsellors over the years. I've had a life coach. All sorts of stuff. As I mentioned before, psychedelics. I've had an experience with ayahuasca, an experience with psilocybin. They were absolutely amazing. I'm still open-minded to doing more of that if the opportunity presents itself. So yeah, you've just got to find what works for you. And it's interesting, because I've got into this podcasting, I've obviously now come into contact with people like yourself. And initially, when you first start doing it, you kind of think you're the only one. And then you kind of come across more and more people that are doing exactly the same thing that you have, some of which have got way more experience than I have at podcasting, and they've got a much further reach. And that was very humbling as well. And it was really nice to be able to connect with people and just have these conversations. I think it's fantastic.
Well, it's, it's like, I swear, not all of my quotes are from English people, but it's like George Harrison said: "The farther one travels, the less one knows." Right? And by the way, George Harrison, I'm sitting here in sandals. I have a Beatles tattoo on my feet. Really big George Harrison fan. But it, there is a lot of truth to what you were saying about getting out of your circle, and it kind of goes all the way back to our original topic of conspiracy theories. It's really easy to get sucked into that when all you're hearing is these views that are exactly the same as yours. Here we have that issue with Fox News, where it's like they will blatantly lie because they know their people want to hear that, and not saying that the other side doesn't do that at times as well. They're just not built on that the same way Fox News is. And this happens, this is not special to the recovery community, right? This idea that you get stuck in whatever works for you is going to work for everybody. And I am almost in a way lucky that I did try to go to AA twice, and neither time was it a good experience. To your point, one time it just wasn't the right group. I was way out in the West living in Arizona, and it was a bunch of old grizzled, people struggling with alcohol misuse. And then here I was, this hippie kid, fresh into recovery from prescription pills. And they were like, "Kid, what the fuck are you doing here?" And the second time was in New York City when I was living there. It was in the basement of a church. And I'm sitting there. And by the way, I'm Jewish. And I'm sitting in the basement of this church. 20 minutes in, no one has shown up. And I'm just sitting there. And finally, a janitor sticks his head in and goes, "Are you here for the NA meeting?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, nobody comes to this shit," and walks out. And I was like, every time I try to go to one of these meetings, it doesn't work out, So the one good meeting I've actually been to was when a buddy of mine got arrested weirdly enough, for shrooms. And they sent him to AA, weirdly enough. And he had to bring a friend to prove that he had gone. And of course, I was like, "Yeah, I'll go with you." At the time, I was still struggling with my own misuse, and I wanted to see what it was like in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I actually got to see what this experience was like. And so I've seen what a meeting can do. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful fellowship. And when you get a meeting that's, I mean, I obviously gravitate towards the meetings that are very open-minded, i.e. they're not the meetings where everybody just shares about alcohol, about drinking, like the war stories. They tend to be the stories that share about the solution, and the solution being for somebody in AA, a higher power of your own understanding. But the caveat on that I always place when I talk to anybody is that there's people in recovery that have no spiritual life whatsoever, and their higher power is just the group. Because really what it boils down to is the connection, like you said before about the Johan Hari quote. Because how could it be that you're recovering and you don't go to 12-step meetings if other options didn't work? It's not possible, is it? So you've got to sit down and have a word with yourself and think to yourself, okay, if AA and NA and the other 12-step fellowships aren't the only thing that works, then what is it that is working? And for me, it is that connection. It's that human connection. I mean, there's absolutely a spiritual element to it, and I'd like to talk to you about your kind of, your beliefs and stuff, because that's obviously a very interesting topic. And for me, that is the component that makes the difference. But ultimately, I get all that through my connection with other people. So even if I wasn't spiritually minded, I would still be having the same result. And I think just another thing as well is, when all you're doing is going to a certain group, it's confirmation bias. It's like positive brainwashing, which is fantastic. But at the same time, that positive brainwashing can start to turn a little bit negative if all you're ever searching for is people to confirm what you think is true. And again, I was like that myself, for a great many years. And then as I became more open-minded to the idea that there was many different paths to recovery, I found that lo and behold, more people wanted to talk to me. And lo and behold, I became better at building relationships with people outside of the fellowship. Because otherwise, if you're closed-minded, people don't want to talk to you.
So how do we how do we address that for people like you early on who was like, nope, this is the only way, and someone like me comes along who didn't use your method, right? Or you know what, even better, you hear these horror stories from AA about the guys who go in and they're taking Suboxone or naltrexone or something, and their sponsor tells them, oh, you're not sober if you're on that, get on it, I'll get off it, and then they relapse and horrible things happen because that one of the tenets, not the tenets, but one of the ideas of AA is that relapse, well, you're starting over, when that's not always the case with everybody. How do we address that issue in those rooms? I mean, what would a younger you listen to in that moment?
That is a very, very good question. I think that the message from within the fellowships kind of just needs to be the spiritual side of it, and the actual program itself. You can kind of figure that out as you go along. Like it isn't designed to be prescriptive. It's designed so that by taking the steps with somebody that's already been through the steps, you can have this change, this change of your personality, and this change of the way that you manage your emotions, and this change in the way that you become able to deal with your mental health issues. But what that requires, in order for you to have that experience and it not become dogmatic, is to be working with somebody who's open-minded, and to be working with somebody who's not telling you what to do. They're just facilitating the experience. And I suppose you and I understand that because we're counselors / coaches. So we understand that we're not telling a person what to do and how to live their life. We're just facilitating that change. But obviously people in 12-step fellowships don't necessarily have that ability. Now, I was very, very lucky that my first sponsor was somebody who was an atheist, and he all he did was read the book with me and answer my questions. He didn't try and prescribe anything to me whatsoever, and my experience just happened on its own. And then my next sponsor was also very open-minded and not prescriptive, and my current sponsor was a counselor, so perfect for me, and that's how I try to be with my sponsees. Is I try to never tell them what to do, or I just give them my experience, and I try and be as open-minded as possible. And I think that is the only way, because I've heard like you, I've heard many horror stories of people that, like yourself, have gone into meetings and they've got the wrong idea, and it's really unfortunate because they never come back, in some cases. But what I'm very interested in is the fact that somebody like you can go to a meeting, never go back to those meetings, and yet whatever it is that you've done in that period of time, you're obviously on that path of recovery, and I think that I want to learn more about that, so that I can say to people, well, this isn't the only way, and if this doesn't work for you, you can go and do this. So what have you done in that time?
Yeah, well, I'd say that there's two big buckets, right, in what I do, and it's sort of external and internal. The one part of AA that I personally love is the being of service. I think that is, in my mind, that may be the most important piece, because we know from psychological studies that you feel more connected when you help people. It's just the way our brains are wired, just the way our brains work. When you are of service, you feel good about yourself, and it becomes a repeated thing, right? There's this mantra or idea in sort of self-help is tell yourself repeatedly that you are the person that you want to be, and it becomes one of those kind of talking it into existence sort of things, right? And if you want to be a person who is very philanthropic, well, tell yourself you're a person that's very philanthropic, and next thing you know, it will be sort of your go-to, right? You see somebody out on the street, oh, let me go buy you a sandwich, or whatever the case is, let me talk to this person instead of walking right by, because you're changing the way that you yourself think about yourself in the world. So that's sort of the inside out perspective is being of use to other people. And for me, that meant 5 years into recovery, saying yes about telling my story for the first time. And since then, now for almost 6 years, being this guy who is very open about it, willing to hold people's hands and walk with them if they're struggling. That's a lot of my clients, is people who just, their perfect example is one I'm working with right now, whose mother is just berating him all the time for his past use, not even current. He's doing pretty well, and he just doesn't know where to turn. And so he and I talk a lot about how to change his own perspective of who he is, and eventually kind of letting his mom come around, because he's not going to change her mind, unfortunately, very clearly with this moment. So that's sort of the external. And then the internal is doing that work, myself. And that was a lot of work with therapists, because of my story, having this label fostered on me, and having my struggles with substance misuse led by a therapist. It took me a while to trust another therapist, but eventually got there, and have worked with a couple really exceptional therapists, and some not great ones either. I mean, that's sort of every industry, right? You're going to find some good and some bad. And also doing a lot of mindfulness work myself. Like I said, not only the rating my day at the end of the day, but I have other mindfulness practices that I have, baked into my schedule every day. And sort of trying to be a very, we're all trying to be actualized, trying to be the most ourselves we can be. And sometimes that can be really hard for yourself and for the people around you. If you're like, look, I know this probably isn't that big of a deal to you, but I need you to understand how this made me feel, whatever the case is. My wife knows that we have a lot of those conversations both ways. I encourage her to do the same. And if you can get to that point where you're especially with a partner, being that open and that, connected in a way where you can say to them, hey, that little thing you did kind of upset me, or whatever the case is. It's a lot easier to feel more established in the world around you, that that you can be living the life that you want, even if it's not big picture the life you want, but small picture. I can be the person I want to be on a day-to-day basis, because nothing creates more strife than being forced into a situation where even a piece of you is not authentic. It's not, you're hitting up against this idea of what the world wants you to be and who you actually are. And that goes down to what choose your struggle means, is choosing what you're going to struggle for every day, and being that person that you want to be, because the closer you can get to kind of one-to-one of who you are and who you're trying to be, the less you're going to be struggling up against that external wall of, well, I have to put on this face today, or whatever the case is. So that's been the biggest piece for me, is just being authentic and being the person that I want to be every day.
Yeah, that's absolutely where I've come to, kind of fairly recently, I suppose, is just about working on and maintaining that authenticity, being vulnerable. I think it's more difficult to be completely open and honest with the people that are close to you than it is with the people in your meetings, your groups, your therapists, because they've got the ability to hurt you, and especially if you share something which, my partner's been guilty of doing this, and I've been guilty of doing it to her. She might share something that's kind of, a real vulnerability, and then 3 months down the line, I'm using that vulnerability against her, in an argument, which is terrible, absolutely terrible. And, when that got brought up, it makes you see like how important it is to be able to be there for a person, you want that reciprocated. I want to feel like I can be open and honest with my partner, and she's not going to ridicule me, she's not going to judge me, she's not going to throw it back in my face, and there's always still, isn't there, like that little part of you that goes, no, don't share that. Keep that one back for yourself. But it's just progress, mate. It's just like whereas 10 years ago, I trusted absolutely no one. That was my mantra, trust no one, and gradually over time, it was kind of like, well, I'll trust people if they earn my trust, and now I just kind of try my best to trust people until they break my trust. That's the difference. And I think that, you talked about self-actualization, and, one of my friends in recovery always used to say, do you think we'll become enlightened? Like if we keep practicing this stuff? And I said, I used to say to him, enlightenment isn't a goal of mine, not in this lifetime anyway. Like, what I understand about enlightenment, I said, it's just not a goal. I said, but self-actualization is a goal, to transcend the material world in the sense of like needing it for your happiness, and to be open and honest and authentic and vulnerable, and and have that peace of mind as a result of it all at all times. I think that's achievable. I really do. And I think there's people that I know that have kind of achieved that.
So I want to applaud you on the trust piece, that you've been able to come as far as you have, because you're not alone in that with people who struggle with substance misuse. That is a very common thing for us. And there was a study that was done a couple of years ago now, about how long the average person can think of, quote unquote, into the future. And again, the average person, it was like 4 to 7 years, right? But if someone's struggling with substance misuse, that number was 2 weeks. And it was because we're so focused on, all right, I got to get my next hit, drink, whatever the case is, that thinking much beyond that just isn't a thing that we're able to do. And what is trust other than being able to think longer term besides just this moment, right? And so that is a very common theme of recovery, is being able to find that trust again. So if you're able to do that, applause to you, man. You've come a lot farther towards that actualization than I think a lot of people do, unfortunately.
Well, I think that, to give a perfect example of that is that, you're married, obviously, and I'm engaged, and I was supposed to get married on the 4th of July, but it was cancelled due to COVID. And I've been married before. Now, the first time I got married, I was 29, and I got married to a woman who I was with really because I felt like it was my duty to make up to her all for all the shit that I put her through. And unfortunately, it was completely the wrong reasons to get married, and and the marriage ended a couple of years later, and then I was in this period of just feeling shameful and sorry for everything that I put her through, and the fact that I'd married her and blah blah blah. Whereas now I'm engaged to a woman who I want to spend the rest of my life with her. Sorry, what I meant to say as well about my first wife was, I suppose in the back of my mind there was always like, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just get divorced. There was always this kind of get out clause. Whereas I would never put Adele through that. If I thought to myself, actually, this is not going to be for life, and the chances are it probably won't work out, I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go ahead with it. And I'm thinking long term. Like we've got like a 10-year plan of what we want to do with our lives, what we want to do with our children, etc. And that's massively responsible and trusting, and it makes me feel like it gives me a higher level of self-esteem, because I feel like a grown up. Whereas previously I just felt like I was just some kid meandering through life, going from one kind of exciting thing or disaster to the next. So yeah, it's taken a lot of work, and the spiritual piece for me, like you've mentioned, mindfulness and I meditate religiously twice a day for a minimum of 15 minutes. And that has been huge in my recovery. Like since I started meditating, and I pray as well to a higher power that I don't really understand, but that's something that I do. I take inventory. So like when you're doing your kind of your app, I do a written inventory that I send to my sponsor, and I speak to people regularly. I pick up the phone, and that is my spiritual program, is that with always the goal of helping people, like you said. I mean, love and service is what recovery is about. 2 simple words. That's exactly what Dr. Bob, who was the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he said you can boil recovery down to 2 simple words: love and service. And if you've got those in the forefront of your mind, you're going to do okay. So that's what I always try to remember. And I suppose, similarly to you, like I just have this program. I just go through these daily, it's routine and discipline, like I have my daily routine. I'm disciplined with it. And, as time's gone by, they say in recovery, the road gets narrower, don't they? Like you've got less leeway to do the shit things that you used to do because they make you feel worse. So as time goes by, I suppose my daily routine gets more and more, focused on the things that are good for me, mind, body, and spirit. Really. I mean, what's your kind of take on the spiritual? Because obviously you've got you're into the supernatural. So what's your take on the spiritual angle of recovery?
Honestly, the spiritual piece has never been at the forefront for me. I guess the right way to say it would be that it's always been a thing that's been there, but it's never been a thing that is a focus, I guess would be the right way to say it. And I'm comfortable saying I don't know. I would describe myself as probably agnostic. I don't think there's anything out there, but I'm also not, I'm not, I don't know. And so that's why I'm like, I don't think I could ever say I'm an atheist. I don't know. That's the answer. I have no idea.
And I think that's the most humble answer you can give, to be honest. I think that anybody that claims to know probably doesn't. But I just spent a lot of last year, I basically started writing a book at the beginning of the first lockdown. And through working with my life coach, I was able to really focus on it, and I got it finished. So I probably wrote it and finished it within I think it was about 7 or 8 months, and it's actually been picked up by a publisher. So it's going to be published this year, probably around summer, maybe a little bit later. And the title is All Is One: The Science and Spirituality of Consciousness. And what I've delved into, like in a very kind of analytical way, is the science of spirituality, but also the religion and philosophy, and what each has to say. And it was really interesting, like the amount of research that went into it. Like it was fantastic for me to help my understanding. And then as I came towards the end of the book, I was just kind of thinking, well, I just don't know. I just don't know. All I know is that, doing certain things just works for me. It helps me to live a life free from mental obsession and emotional turmoil. But how that's happening, and if there is a higher power or a God, I've got absolutely no idea.
Well, you and I could talk for hours, clearly. But I always finish with 2 questions that I ask everybody. So I'm going to do those for you now. Number 1, not just during COVID, but what, we all go through stress a lot in our life. You already said that you meditate. What are some of your other self-care habits that work for you?
Exercise is 3 things for my self-care. 1 is exercise. So I go for a run and I do a little bit of kind of home gym work at least 2 or 3 times a week. Walking my dog. I walk my dog twice a day
Nice.
for about half an hour, and I don't have my headphones in or anything like that. I just walk the dog, and that really helps me. And just eating well, like when I'm not concentrating on the chocolate, I do try to concentrate on eating fruit. Like one of the tenets of Taoism is only eat foods that sustain life themselves. So that's what I try to stick to. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's funny. I was at a presentation a couple of years ago, and this guy was thinking it was all about forward thinking, and one of the things he was showing was if you go back, there's always, every generation, there's something that we are doing that future generations are going to go, I can't believe they fucking did that. We think about like our grandparents' generation, the fact that everybody smoked, everybody, and it was thought to be if you smoke, you'll lose weight and all this kind of stuff. And now we're like, are you fucking kidding me? That's terrible. And so of course I raised my hand and said, okay, what are we doing now that we're going to be like, oh my God, he said, easy answer, sugar. He said it's in everything. He said it is literally poison at the levels we are eating it, and we continue to eat it and drink it and all the stuff like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So
I think that I'm pretty convinced that it's the leading cause of cancer. from the research I've done into it. And the terrible thing about it is, Jay, that like I am addicted to it. Like if I come off it, I go through withdrawals, I go through the sweats, I get like the mental torture. So yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, my wife and I did it for a year. We only added sugar 1 day a week. And now we don't do that anymore. And I find that it's multiple days a week, because once you have one, well, what are you going to do either the next day or the day after? And so it's one of those things that I try to mindfully, okay, did I have added sugar yesterday? I should probably take today off, maybe even tomorrow, because it is very bad for you at the levels we eat it. All right, final question. Is we've spent the last hour hearing about all the amazing stuff you're doing, why all of my listeners should go follow you. But who are people that influence you? Who are people you're following, listening to, watching, reading, whatever the case is, that we should all go check out?
I think that, I mean, I've kind of come off the podcasts. I used to be heavily into the podcasts, but I used to listen to Joe Rogan, obviously, like the biggest podcast in the world. I used to listen to a lot of Russell Brand's podcasts, Duncan Trussell. Who else? Chris Ryan is a good podcast that I used to listen to, but I've kind of come off those now, and I've been doing more reading. And over the years, Anthony DeMello is somebody that you should definitely check out. Dr. Wayne Dyer comes to mind. Deepak Chopra is another one. And I don't know, like on a day-to-day level, I don't really follow that many people, if I'm honest with you. I just kind of concentrate on my own thing. I suppose, you reach a place in your life, don't you, where you've learned a lot of stuff, and then you just want to kind of pass that on to other people and try and be a bit of a leader yourself. So yeah, and I up until recently, I was working with a life coach. Big up to Dennis. He was a great influence, Dennis Berry. So you can check him out at dennisberry.com for life coaching.
I have been on his podcast. I love Dennis. Cool. Yeah,
man, he's an absolute legend. So he's a person who's had a positive influence on me recently. And then the only other person I suppose to mention is my sponsor, Alex. He's a great influence. Excuse me. And my partner, Adele, because Adele is very, very level-headed, and she's the voice of reason when my head gets a bit crazy.
Well, normally I do this multiple times throughout an episode, but we had such a good conversation, I didn't want to interrupt us. So please shout out where people can follow you, where they can find you online, if they're digging what you're putting down and they're like, oh my God, I want to talk to him, all the good stuff.
Yeah, if you go to www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk, you can find everything that you need to find about me on there.
And for your listeners, when you put this out, whatever form it is, if you're interested in chatting with me or, whatever the case is, I coach, I speak, I've consulted with business, all the good stuff. You can find me at jayschiffman.com, JAYSHIFMAN.com.
Perfect, mate. That was brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you.
Whoops. I meant to stop recording and I hit the wrong button. So